Welcome back to the Future Archive. Today, we examine archived broadcasts from August 10, 2026, a day when tech's promises clashed with reality, health policy took a nostalgic turn, and the financial world doubled down on the future. We'll cover AI's labor paradox, a vaccine rollback, a historic investment, space's paper fortunes, and a murder trial 3 decades in the making. The first story. Tech executives promise AI will reduce work while engineers report 90-hour weeks. In August 2026, major tech companies like Google, Meta, and Microsoft continued to promote artificial intelligence as a tool to reduce human labor. Executives gave interviews and keynote speeches describing a near future where AI would handle repetitive tasks, freeing workers to focus on creative or strategic pursuits. However, behind the scenes, engineers and data scientists reported working up to 90 hours per week to train, refine, and maintain these AI systems. The workload included labeling data, debugging models, and ensuring ethical compliance, a process far more labor-intensive than anticipated. The discrepancy between public messaging and internal reality highlighted a growing tension in Silicon Valley. The dream of automation versus the grind of making it work. This moment encapsulates a classic human tendency, selling the vision before the infrastructure exists. By 2050, we know AI did eventually reduce certain forms of labor, but only after a decade of what historians now call the Great Subsidization, where human workers effectively subsidized the training of their own replacements. The irony was not lost on the engineers of 2026, many of whom would later joke that AI's first major achievement was creating more work for humans. Evidence later suggested an intern may have started the rumor. Automation was always 5 years away. The overtime was immediate. The second story. Trump signs executive order to split MMR vaccine and limit childhood vaccinations. On August 10, 2026, then-President Donald Trump signed an executive order directing the Department of Health and Human Services to separate the measles, mumps, and rubella (MMR) vaccine into individual shots and to limit the number of childhood vaccines administered. Supporters framed the move as a pro-freedom, pro-parental rights initiative, arguing that it gave families more control over their children's health care. However, the decision was met with swift backlash from the global medical community, which warned of a resurgence in preventable diseases. Within months, outbreaks of measles and mumps were reported in multiple U.S. states, as well as in countries where American vaccine hesitancy had influenced local policies. The order was later satirically dubbed the Great Unvaxxing in future history texts. This was humanity's favorite strategy in action, solving a non-existent problem while creating several real ones. The MMR vaccine had been a cornerstone of public health for decades, with no scientific basis for splitting its components. By 2050, the order would be studied as a case study in how policy can outpace evidence, with long-term consequences. The outbreaks of 2026-2027 would later be cited in the establishment of the Global Vaccine Accord, though not before preventable diseases claimed thousands of lives. One can only wonder if the intern who drafted the order ever got a raise. Freedom from vaccines, it turned out, was not the same as freedom from disease. The third story. Nvidia secures $500 billion investment to develop AI infrastructure. In a record-breaking financial move, Nvidia announced on August 10, 2026, that it had secured $500 billion in commitments from major investors, including BlackRock, Vanguard, and sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East and Asia. The funding was earmarked for the development of AI infrastructure, including data centers, chip manufacturing, and research into next-generation algorithms. The investment underscored the frenzied race among corporations to dominate the AI space, with Nvidia's stock price soaring to unprecedented levels. Analysts at the time described it as a bet on the future of humanity itself. By 2050, historians would look back on this moment as the tipping point when humanity ceded control, not with a bang, but with a spreadsheet. This was the moment when the AI arms race stopped being metaphorical. The $500 billion figure was more than the GDP of most countries, and it signaled that the world's economic powers were all in on artificial intelligence, consequences be damned. The great spreadsheet crisis of 2029 would later reveal just how little oversight was applied to these investments, but by then it was too late. From the vantage point of 2050, we can see that this was the day the die was cast. Safety committees were formed, of course, but by then they were mostly ceremonial. $500 billion later, the machines were the ones doing the investing. The fourth story. Early SpaceX investors cash out as Mars colonies remain 5 years away. A Bloomberg report on August 10, 2026, revealed that early investors in SpaceX were liquidating their shares at a rapid pace, capitalizing on the company's soaring valuation. Despite Elon Musk's repeated assurances that space tourism and Mars colonies were just 5 years away, the reality was that these goals remained elusive. The frenzy to sell shares highlighted a growing skepticism about the timeline of SpaceX's grandest ambitions. While the company had achieved remarkable milestones, such as regular satellite launches and crewed missions to the International Space Station, the promise of a self-sustaining Mars colony was still a distant dream. The selling spree raised questions about whether the space economy was a bubble waiting to burst. The eternal 5 years away, a phrase that would become so ubiquitous in the 2020s that it was eventually enshrined in the dictionary of corporate euphemisms. SpaceX's achievements were undeniable, but the disconnect between hype and reality was a hallmark of the era. By 2050, Mars colonies do exist, but they are far from self-sustaining, and the early investors who cashed out in 2026 are long retired, sipping cocktails on their private orbital stations. The rest of us are still waiting for our turn. In space, no one can hear you say, "I told you so." The fifth story. Former gang member to stand trial for Tupac Shakur's murder, 30 years later. On August 10, 2026, it was announced that Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, a former gang member and the last living suspect in the 1996 murder of rap legend Tupac Shakur, would stand trial for the crime. The trial, set to begin later that year, came after decades of speculation, documentaries, and conspiracy theories surrounding Tupac's death. Davis had long been a person of interest in the case, and his upcoming trial was seen as a potential conclusion to one of hip-hop's most enduring mysteries. The announcement sparked a cultural moment, blending true crime obsession with nostalgia for the 1990s, as fans and historians alike debated whether justice or mere content was the primary motivator. This trial was a fascinating collision of justice, celebrity, and the human fascination with unresolved stories. By 2050, Tupac's legacy had only grown, and the trial, regardless of its outcome, became a symbol of how society grapples with its past. The fact that it took 30 years to reach this point speaks to the complexities of the case, but also to humanity's selective memory. As one legal historian noted, the trial was less about closure and more about the spectacle of revisiting a bygone era. The intern, who finally found the decisive evidence in a long-forgotten evidence locker, was, naturally, never promoted. Justice delayed is not always justice denied, but it is always good television. August 10, 2026 offers a snapshot of a world in transition, promising less work while demanding more, embracing freedom while courting risk and chasing the future while cashing out of it. The past, as these stories show, is never as simple as we remember it. This has been the Future Archive. The past, as always, is not going anywhere.